quotes, helped me in this regard is that, in the case of Hubbard and a number of others, including some who aren't even in the film, it's not like every piece of embarrassing film is in this film, not at all, quite the contrary. They were so embarrassed and ashamed at the end of their, and fearful at the end of their interviews, that the last thing they wanted to do was tell anybody what had occurred.
Good strategy. Yes?
I have a question about how you handle Lehman, and given how much you attack Paulson, otherwise I'm surprised that in your dealing...
Hold on just, wait. Now, is it working now? Your mic? There we go.
Okay, we'll try again. I'm sorry, I apologize. In the downfall of Lehman and otherwise you look at Paulson, why didn't you look at Paulson's relationship with Fold, that kind of antagonism that some have said is why he chose not to say? I mean, that's what some people say when you deal with that.
You heard that, I think.
The question of why Lehman was forced into bankruptcy it's one of these questions like why the Bush administration started the Iraq War. You know, there's 20 different possible explanations. Each of them probably has some degree of truth. I would love to be Henry Paulson's psychiatrist, and unfortunately I'm not. So let me give you the list. So one is everybody hated Richard Fold. You know, he apparently, I've never met him myself. He obviously declined the interview. He apparently had antagonized just about everybody on the entire planet with his just his personality, arrogant, abrasive, etc. That's one. Second is, unlike most of the other Wall Street firms, the top management of Lehman Brothers was primarily, with just one exception, a cousin of President Bush, was composed primarily of Democrats who were substantial contributors to the Democratic Party, and so there's that argument. The third is that Paulson really did care about the moral hazard argument and wanted to make an example of this company. Fourth, which I'm about to list is clearly true, is that he didn't have the faintest goddamn idea of how much damage Lehman's bankruptcy would actually cause. A fifth is, there's a lot. A fifth is that Lehman had been emerging over the previous decade as an increasingly serious competitor to Goldman Sachs. And then finally, there's also the possibility that there was a sort of ego issue that Paulson kind of got into this. There was no easy way for him to back down personally when the British said that they wouldn't do it unless there was a federal guarantee, and so, you know, kind of testosterone poisoning issue. So that's the list. Choose what you like. Several people tried to retract permission for their interviews, but we already had their signed release forms, and that was that. In regard to the question of pressure, I have to say something about the Sony guys, Michael Barker and Tom Bernard, and Sony Pictures Classics. They have been, you know, excuse me, I'm going to be a little bit vulgar to make my point. They've been totally fucking amazing. They, you know, I was really scared when I started making this film, that at some point I was going to get a phone call, you know, this guy, he's my next door neighbor, this guy's a major investor, this guy's a major shareholder, you know, never once. Never once. And they are now supporting this film extremely strongly. And, you know, I have my quibbles with the movie distribution business, but they have been incredible. They have really been incredible.
Okay, we've got another question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm curious when the structure of the film came to you, the 5-act structure. This is a very good job of making things clear that I have found to be muddy for a long time. you obviously had to have a very high ratio of what was shot to what you actually used. Did you know up front where the story was going to go, how it was going to be threaded through, or did that all just come about at the end when you looked at all this footage and said, now what do we do?
I would say it's about half and half. By the time we started editing, I certainly had done an enormous amount of research, and obviously I knew what was in the interviews because I had conducted them. But at the same time, there was just an extraordinary amount of material. First of all, we filmed, 70, 75 interviews, quite long interviews typically. Typical interview was an hour and a half long. Some of them were 2 or 3 hours long. In addition, we had an incredible mass of documentation of various kinds, books, articles, lawsuits, government documents, academic articles, huge quantity of stuff. And so the editors were critical in this. The two editors, Chad Beck and Adam Bolt, they are much more than what you normally think of an editor as being. They're brilliant, brilliant people. And the structure of the film really emerged, I would say that I had like half of it in my head when we started editing, and the other half, maybe even less, but something like that. And the rest of it emerged working very long hours with them, and they worked really hard. I mean, unbelievably hard. The last 4 months, they were working 6 days a week till typically 1, 2 in the morning. And I was in there with them. I was typically in the editing room 6 to 8 hours a day.
We just end up with asking both of you to tell us, where do you see, I guess, the economy in 5 years, and do you think there'll ever be any convictions?
I think we've got a rough 5 years ahead of us, and possibly a rough generation. The American economy and American society are troubled, and there's all of this, which is a big thing, and then there are all of the other important things that aren't being attended to because the people responsible for this don't care about attending to them. The high school graduation rate in South Korea is 96%. In America, it's 78%. That's a problem. With regard to convictions, I think there will be convictions if and only if the American people get angry enough.
Yeah, I think anyone who thinks that they know what the economy is going to do 5 years from now, I see most of the likely outcomes on the downside, and the range of possible bad outcomes is very, very wide. More likely, I think, is we'll have a long, slow, stagnant period. And how long? Actually, when I first thought about this, you think of what happened to Japan in the 1990s. We could see something very, very much like that. We just slowly get poorer. But the second part of that, I forget.
Convictions. Do you think
Convictions.
Well, possibly not, but I think people may look more finely at the tort bar when there's a lot of interesting lawsuits taking shape because and it's going to be hard for people to claim that they didn't do this and they didn't. So you might see a lot of money getting disgorged from some of the top 10 to 1%, which would be a good thing.